I always believed that family was built on trust, that the love and loyalty we poured into one another would shield us from betrayal. That's why, when it came time to pass down our family's most precious heirloom, I placed it in the hands of the one person I believed would protect it: my daughter. She'd always been the responsible one, the one who honored tradition and understood the weight of legacy. I never imagined that the greatest threat to that legacy would come from someone who claimed to love her too. I thought the family jewelry, pearls and sapphires that had been worn by generations of strong women, would remind her of where she came from and the strength she carried in her blood. But then her mother-in-law entered the picture, with her calculating smile and her velvet words, and everything changed. One piece went missing, then another. And when the final betrayal came, a betrayal wrapped in polite excuses and carefully crafted lies, I knew I had to act. Because sometimes the ones we trust the most are the ones who hurt us the deepest. And when that happens, there's only one thing left to do: show them exactly who they're dealing with. If this story strikes a chord with you, make sure to subscribe, because what I'm about to share is a tale of trust, betrayal, and the quiet strength of a mother who refused to be silenced. The day I decided to pass down the family jewelry, the air felt thick with significance, like the universe itself was holding its breath. I'd spent the morning polishing each piece, my fingers tracing the delicate curves of the pearls, the glint of sapphires that had witnessed every milestone of our family's history. It wasn't just jewelry, it was a legacy, one that had traveled through time, from my great-grandmother's wedding day to my own coming-of-age celebration, a silent witness to births, deaths, and every moment in between. As I laid each piece in its velvet-lined box, I felt the weight of the promise I'd carried since I was a girl, that one day, when the time was right, I would pass this treasure on to my daughter. She would wear it at her own wedding, at her own celebrations, and one day pass it on to the next generation. I thought of my mother's trembling hands as she'd given it to me, her eyes bright with tears. "This is more than jewelry," she'd whispered. "It's a promise, one that binds us to each other no matter what." I'd carried those words with me all my life, letting them guide my choices and shape my understanding of family. And now, standing in the sunlit bedroom of my own home, I felt ready to honor that promise. When my daughter arrived later that afternoon, her smile lit up the room. She'd always had a warmth that drew people in, a light that made even the darkest days feel bearable. I'd never doubted her sense of responsibility, never once thought she'd let me down. "Mom," she said, her eyes widening as she saw the open jewelry box. "Is it time?" I nodded, my heart full. "It's time," I said softly, placing the box in her hands. "Take care of it, darling. This isn't just for you. It's for every woman who came before you, and every woman who will come after." She pressed her lips together, her eyes shining. "I promise, Mom. I'll treasure it always." In that moment, I believed her with every fiber of my being. But sometimes, the promises we make and the promises we keep are two different things. And sometimes, the weight of a legacy isn't enough to shield us from the betrayals we never saw coming. If you've ever given your trust to someone and had it broken, you'll understand what comes next. Because the story of how the heirloom left my hands, and how I took it back, was just beginning. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, her eyes wide with a mixture of excitement and reverence as she cradled the velvet-lined box in her hands. The afternoon sun slanted through the window, illuminating the delicate filigree of the necklace, the gentle shimmer of the pearls, and the sapphire's cool glow. "This is the same necklace Grandma gave you, isn't it?" she asked, her voice trembling just enough to tell me she understood the weight of what I was giving her. "Yes," I said softly. "And her mother gave it to her before that." It's more than a piece of jewelry, darling. It's a promise that we pass from mother to daughter, one that says you are strong enough to carry this legacy." She nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. I reached across the table and took her hand, the way my mother had done for me on the day she'd handed me the same box. "I trust you," I whispered, my voice steady despite the emotions threatening to rise. "Not just with the jewelry, but with the promise it holds. I know you'll cherish it and keep it safe." Her fingers tightened around mine. "I will, Mom. I promise." I believed her. I believed her because she had always been the one who stayed late to help in the kitchen, who called me just to ask about my day, who sat with me during the quiet, lonely evenings after her father passed. I believed her because she was my daughter, and a mother's heart wants to believe in her child more than anything else in the world. She stayed for hours that afternoon, the jewelry box between us like a bridge of trust. We talked about family stories, about the times I'd worn the necklace at important moments, my wedding, the day I'd signed the papers for our first home, the day she was born. When she finally left, carrying the box carefully to her car, I stood in the doorway and watched her drive away. A quiet sense of pride filled me, mingled with the bittersweet ache of letting go. But as the taillights disappeared into the evening, a small voice whispered from the depths of my heart, "Trust is a gift, but it is also a risk." I pushed that thought aside, choosing instead to hold on to the memory of her smile and the promise she'd made. Because sometimes, believing in someone is the bravest thing you can do. And for that moment, I believed with all my heart that she would protect what mattered most. Little did I know, trust was a delicate thing, so easy to give, so easily broken. It was a warm Sunday afternoon when she first arrived, the kind of day that made you want to sit in the garden with a glass of iced tea and let the world drift by. I was in the kitchen, humming to myself as I wiped down the counters, when I heard the front door open. "Mom? We're here." My daughter's voice floated in, bright and warm as always. I turned, a smile already forming on my lips. But it faltered when I saw who followed behind her. Tall and elegant, with a perfectly coiffed hairstyle and an air of cool sophistication, my daughter's mother-in-law, Margaret, swept into the house like she owned it. She wore a pale pink dress that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill and carried a small designer handbag that she cradled like a trophy. "Ah, you must be Helen," she said, her voice smooth as satin, but with an undercurrent that made my skin prickle. She extended a hand that was manicured to perfection, each nail a tiny work of art. "That's right," I replied, taking her hand in mine, feeling the coolness of her skin. "Welcome. I didn't know you'd be joining us today." My daughter shifted uncomfortably beside her, her eyes darting between us. "It was a bit last minute, Mom," she said. "Margaret was visiting, and I thought it would be nice for her to see the house." I forced a polite smile, though a part of me bristled at the implication. My home was no museum. It was the place where my daughter had grown up, the place where memories lived in every corner. Margaret's eyes drifted around the living room, taking in the worn but carefully polished furniture, the family photos that lined the mantel. Her lips curved in a small, tight smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "How charming," she murmured, her gaze lingering on a framed photo of my daughter wearing the heirloom necklace. "And that's the piece you gave her, isn't it? The one that's been in your family for generations?" My heart tightened. "Yes, it is," I said, keeping my tone measured. She stepped closer to the photo, tilting her head as if studying a particularly interesting insect. Such a responsibility, isn't it? Keeping something like that safe. I imagine it would be easy to misplace. A chill ran down my spine, though the afternoon sun still streamed through the windows. "My daughter knows how much it means," I replied, my voice firm. She promised to take care of it. Margaret turned to me then, her smile widening. Of course, she purred. And she's such a sweet girl, so generous, so eager to please. I'm sure she'd want to share such a beautiful heirloom with family. The implication hung in the air like a storm cloud. My daughter's cheeks flushed pink, and she busied herself with her handbag, avoiding my gaze. Would you like some tea? I asked, needing a moment to collect myself. Margaret waved a perfectly manicured hand dismissively. No, thank you. I just wanted to stop by and see the piece for myself. I've always believed that family treasures should be appreciated. The way she said it made my stomach churn. She turned her attention back to the photograph, her eyes cold and calculating. You know, she said, her tone light, but her gaze sharp. Some families don't always understand the importance of sharing, especially when it comes to things of real value. I stood there, rooted to the spot, the weight of her words pressing on my chest. Margaret turned and offered me another smile, her teeth gleaming. Anyway, she said breezily, I'll let you two catch up. I just wanted to see it for myself. After all, it's practically part of our family now, isn't it? She left in a swirl of designer perfume, leaving behind an air that felt thick with unspoken threats. My daughter stayed behind, staring at the floor as if she could will herself to disappear. Mom, she whispered, her voice small and uncertain. I held up a hand, the hurt and confusion swirling in my chest like a storm. We'll talk later, I said softly. For now, just know this. Some things aren't meant to be shared. She nodded, tears threatening to spill as she turned away. Because sometimes an unexpected visitor doesn't just come for tea. Sometimes they come to plant seeds of doubt, to stake a claim on something that was never theirs to begin with. And in that moment, I knew the fight for my family's legacy had only just begun. Days passed after Margaret's visit, but her presence lingered in the corners of the house like a shadow I couldn't quite chase away. Every time I walked into the living room, I half expected to see her by the mantel, her eyes cool and calculating as she admired the family photos and heirloom jewelry in the frame. My daughter tried to pretend everything was normal. She called me every evening, her voice bright but too careful, as though afraid the wrong word might shatter the fragile peace between us. Everything's fine, Mom, she'd say. Margaret's back home, and I've been busy with work. I'd nod, even though she couldn't see me. That's good, sweetheart, I'd reply, my voice as calm as I could make it. But in the quiet moments after the calls ended, doubts crept in like vines through an open window. I trusted my daughter, but Margaret's words kept echoing in my mind. Family treasures should be appreciated. Some families don't understand the importance of sharing. I brushed them away each time they surfaced, but one afternoon, while I was cleaning the small cabinet where I kept the jewelry box, I decided to polish the pieces, a small ritual that had always brought me comfort. I reached for the necklace first, the one with the delicate sapphire pendant, the piece my mother had worn on her wedding day. But when I opened the box, my breath caught in my throat. It wasn't there. The space where it had always lain was empty, a perfect imprint in the velvet where it should have rested. My hands shook as I checked the corners, lifting every other piece, hoping it had simply shifted or been misplaced. But there was nothing. Panic flared in my chest, hot and cold all at once. I pulled the entire box onto the table, carefully laying each piece out, but the necklace was nowhere to be found. A memory flashed through my mind. Margaret standing by the mantel, her eyes sharp as she admired the photo of my daughter wearing the necklace. Her fingers had hovered over the glass frame, her words laced with a false sweetness. It's practically part of our family now, isn't it? No, I couldn't believe it. My daughter would never let that happen. I'd trusted her, believed her promise. But doubt gnawed at the edges of that belief, relentless as the tide. I picked up the phone, my fingers trembling as I dialed her number. She answered on the third ring, her voice cheerful but strained. "Hi, Mom," she said. "I was just about to call you." "Sweetheart," I began, trying to keep my voice even. "I was cleaning the jewelry box, and I noticed the sapphire necklace is missing. Do you know where it is?" There was a pause, just long enough to twist the knife of worry deeper. "Missing?" she repeated, her voice small. "No, Mom. I haven't touched it. Maybe you put it somewhere else?" My heart sank. I knew exactly where I'd kept it. I'd cared for that necklace like it was part of me. "No," I said, my voice trembling. "I've always kept it in the same place. Are you sure you haven't lent it to anyone? Maybe Margaret asked to borrow it?" The hesitation in her voice was all the answer I needed. "Margaret," she echoed, her tone defensive now. "She's family, Mom. She would never." "Did she ask to borrow it?" I pressed, unable to stop the words from tumbling out. A long silence stretched between us, heavy and accusing. When she spoke again, her voice was so quiet I could barely hear it. She admired it. She said she'd love to see it up close, to maybe wear it for a special dinner. I didn't think. I closed my eyes, the pain sharp and deep. "Sweetheart," I whispered, "the necklace was never yours to give away." Her breath hitched on the other end of the line. I thought it would be okay, just for a little while. She promised she'd give it back." Promised. The same word my daughter had used when I placed the jewelry in her hands. The same promise that now lay shattered in the space where the necklace should have been. "Mom," she said, her voice breaking, "I'm so sorry. I didn't think—" "That's just it," I said, my voice firm but weary. "You didn't think. Because sometimes trust isn't stolen outright. It's given away, one careless choice at a time. And in that moment, I realized the battle I was about to fight wasn't just for the necklace. It was for the promise I'd believed in all my life." The sun dipped low, casting the living room in a honeyed light that made the air feel heavy with unspoken words. My daughter sat across from me, her eyes darting to the jewelry box on the table between us, like it was a bomb waiting to explode. The silence stretched, taut and fragile. I could hear the ticking of the old mantel clock, a steady, relentless reminder that time was running out for the easy explanations we'd both clung to. I folded my hands in my lap, my gaze steady on hers. "I need to know the truth," I said, my voice calm but firm. "Where is the necklace?" She flinched, her fingers twisting together. "Mom, I told you. Margaret borrowed it for a dinner party. She said she'd bring it back." I leaned in, my heart heavy. "And has she?" Her silence was answer enough. "She said she'd wear it just once," she finally whispered, her voice small. "She said it would be safe." I thought. "You thought wrong," I interrupted, the words sharp but not unkind. "That necklace wasn't yours to lend. It was given to you in trust, a trust that's been honored in this family for generations. Did you even think to ask me before you handed it over?" Tears welled in her eyes. "I didn't want to upset you," she said, her voice cracking. "Margaret made it sound like such a small thing. She said it was just a necklace." I shook my head, the ache deep in my chest. "It's never been just a necklace," I said quietly. "It's a promise, a legacy. Every woman who's worn that necklace has understood its importance, and now it's in the hands of someone who doesn't respect that." She looked away, the tears slipping down her cheeks. I thought she'd bring it back," she whispered. "She's family now. I didn't think she'd—" "She's not family," I said, my voice steady but cold. She's your husband's mother. And from the moment she stepped into this house, she's done nothing but undermine me and everything this family stands for. A sharp intake of breath from my daughter, but she didn't argue. I leaned back, my hands trembling in my lap. When you accepted that necklace, you accepted the responsibility that comes with it. That means protecting it, not just from thieves or strangers, but from anyone who would take it from you, even if they do it with a smile and a polite excuse. She nodded miserably. I know, she whispered. I messed up, Mom. I wanted her to like me. I thought giving her the necklace, even just for a night, would show her that I trusted her, that I was part of her family too. The words hung in the air, heavy with regret. I closed my eyes, the pain raw. And now? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Where is it now? She shook her head, her tears falling freely now. She said she put it in her safe, that she'd bring it back next week. But every time I ask, she has an excuse. A fire flared in my chest, hotter and fiercer than I'd felt in years. So she's holding it hostage, I said, my tone low and hard. My daughter's eyes widened, and she nodded, shame etched into every line of her face. I rose from my chair, my hands steady now. Listen to me, I said, my voice sharp as steel. That necklace is not hers. It was never hers. And if she thinks she can keep it, she's about to learn a lesson she won't forget. My daughter looked up at me, her eyes filled with both fear and hope. What are you going to do? She asked, her voice small. I met her gaze unflinchingly. I'm going to remind her, and you, exactly who she's dealing with, I said. Because sometimes, the people who smile the widest are the ones who need to be reminded that legacies aren't something you can steal with a sweet word and a borrowed charm. Sometimes you have to fight for what's yours. And I was ready to do just that. It was a Tuesday afternoon when I decided enough was enough. The air had turned crisp overnight, hinting at the coming winter, and the sky wore the kind of dull gray that made even the brightest days feel subdued. Margaret had left too many promises unkept, too many reassurances that evaporated like smoke. I could almost hear her syrupy voice in my head, promising she'd bring the necklace back, next week, the same way she'd promised to treat my daughter like family. I didn't bother to call ahead. I wanted the element of surprise, a chance to look her in the eye and see if she'd dare lie to my face. Her house was exactly as I'd imagined, all perfect lines and manicured hedges, a testament to her desire to keep up appearances. I rang the doorbell, my heart pounding, my palms damp with a determination I hadn't felt in years. She opened the door with a practiced smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Helen, she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. What a lovely surprise. Do come in. I stepped over the threshold, my eyes scanning the room with its expensive furniture and carefully arranged throw pillows. Everything in its place, except the one thing that mattered. Margaret, I began, my voice calm but sharp. I'm here for the necklace. Her smile faltered for just an instant before snapping back into place. Oh, that old thing? She said, waving a dismissive hand. I'm so sorry, dear. I've been meaning to return it. It's just been so busy around here lately. You know how it is. I folded my arms, my gaze steady. You've had it for weeks, I said, each word deliberate. My daughter told me you borrowed it for one dinner party. That was all. Where is it? She fluttered her hand as if shooing away an annoying insect. Oh, Helen, don't be so dramatic. It's perfectly safe. I just haven't had time to drop it off. Honestly, I'm shocked you'd think I'd do anything else. I took a step closer, the fire in my chest burning hotter with every word she spoke. This isn't about being busy, Margaret, I said, my voice low. This is about respect and ownership. That necklace has been in my family for generations. It's not a party favor for you to flaunt. Her eyes sharpened, a flash of something hard and cold beneath the practiced politeness. You're overreacting, she snapped. It's just a piece of jewelry. I wore it once for a family gathering. Honestly, I thought I'd be doing your daughter a favor, showing it off. It's not like it's worth a fortune. My hands curled into fists at my sides. It's priceless to me, I said, my voice trembling with the force of my anger. And it's not yours to keep. Where is it now? She shrugged, her lips twisting into a tight, patronizing smile. It's in my safe. I didn't want anything to happen to it, especially with how busy things have been. I stared at her, disbelief and fury warring inside me. You're safe, I echoed, as if it was yours to lock away. Margaret, you had no right. Her eyes glittered with a sharpness I hadn't seen before. Rights, she repeated, her tone mocking. Honestly, Helen, sometimes I think you forget how things work in modern families. We share things. We support each other. I thought you'd appreciate that I was keeping it safe until your daughter was ready to use it again. The gall of it left me breathless. Until my daughter was ready? I spat, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. She was ready the moment I gave it to her. You've taken that choice away from her. And from me. Margaret sighed dramatically, rolling her eyes as if I were a child throwing a tantrum. Helen, really? This is all so unnecessary. I'll get it for you. Next time I have a free afternoon. Honestly, the way you're carrying on, you'd think it was the crown jewels. I took a step forward, my eyes locked on hers. It's not the crown jewels, I said, my voice low and steady. It's the promise my mother made to me, and I made to my daughter. And you've broken that promise with your lies and excuses. She opened her mouth, but I cut her off, the anger and hurt pouring out of me in a single, unstoppable wave. You've disrespected me. You've disrespected my family. And you've underestimated me if you think I'm going to walk out of here empty-handed. She blinked, the facade cracking just enough for me to see the truth in her eyes. She never thought I'd stand up to her. Well, she said, her voice tight. I suppose I can get it for you. But I do hope you realize how difficult this makes things between us. After all, family harmony is so important. I didn't flinch. Harmony doesn't come at the cost of my family's history, I said. I'll wait while you get it. She hesitated, her lips pressed into a thin line, but then she turned and left the room. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding, my hands trembling, my heart pounding with both fear and triumph. Because sometimes, the hardest battles are the ones you never thought you'd have to fight. And sometimes, standing your ground means facing the lies head-on, no matter how polite they sound. The drive home that evening felt longer than usual, the miles stretching out like a silent accusation. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, my mind replaying every word Margaret had said, every dismissive shrug, every false promise. The necklace, finally back in my hands, lay in its velvet box on the passenger seat. I'd demanded it before leaving her house, unwilling to accept another empty reassurance. The weight of it felt heavier than it should have, as if it carried every disappointment, every betrayal, every fractured promise between mother and daughter. When I got home, I placed the box on the kitchen table and stared at it, the memories of generations staring back at me. I thought of my mother's trembling hands the day she'd passed it to me, her voice gentle but firm. This is yours now. Protect it, and protect yourself. I thought I'd done that. I thought I'd pass that wisdom to my daughter too. But now, as the night deepened around me, Doubt gnawed at the edges of my heart. The phone rang, its shrill tone slicing through the silence. I answered it, already knowing who it would be. "Mom?" Her voice was small, hesitant. Did you get it back?" I closed my eyes, the ache sharp in my chest. "I did," I said. "It's home now." A long pause. "I'm glad," she said finally, but the relief I'd hoped for didn't come. Instead, there was a distance, a thin veil of defensiveness that hadn't been there before. "Mom," she continued, her voice trembling. "Margaret said you were rude, that you demanded it back without even giving her a chance to explain. She said you made a scene." A bitter laugh escaped my lips before I could stop it. "A scene?" I echoed. "Darling, I didn't make a scene. I made a stand." She sighed, and the sound carried all the exhaustion and confusion that had built between us. I didn't want this to turn into a fight. I thought she was family. You thought she was safe," I finished for her. "You thought you could trust her the way you trust me. But trust is earned, not assumed." She was quiet for a moment, and then she whispered, "I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't mean for this to happen." I closed my eyes, tears pricking the corners. "I know you didn't," I said softly. "But it did." The silence on the line was different this time, thick, strained, like a wall had been built between us brick by brick. I wanted to reach through the phone and pull her back to me, to remind her of the bond we'd always shared. But even as I tried to find the right words, I knew the rift had already begun to grow. "Mom," she said finally, her voice cracking, "I just wish you could understand how hard it is, trying to balance everyone's expectations. Margaret's, yours, my husband's. It's not easy." I gripped the phone tighter, the pain sharp as a blade. "Being a wife and a daughter isn't supposed to be easy," I said. "But you should never have to choose between your family and your integrity." Her breath hitched, and I heard a soft sniffle. "I know," she whispered. "I know." I wanted to tell her I forgave her, that everything would be all right. But the words wouldn't come. The hurt ran too deep, the trust too frayed. "Just take some time," I said instead, my voice trembling. "Think about what family really means. Think about who deserves your loyalty." She didn't reply right away. When she did, her voice was small, like the child I'd once held in my arms. "Okay," she said. "I'll think about it." The line went dead, leaving me alone in the kitchen with the necklace and a silence that felt heavier than any heirloom. Because sometimes, the hardest part of protecting a legacy isn't defending it from outsiders. It's watching it slip away from the ones you love most. And sometimes, no matter how strong the bond, trust, once broken, isn't so easily repaired. I spent the next few days with the necklace never far from my sight. It rested in its velvet box on the dresser in my bedroom, the gentle gleam of the sapphire catching the light each time I passed by. Every time I looked at it, I felt a knot in my stomach, a reminder of the trust that had been broken, of the daughter who had, however unintentionally, handed my legacy to someone who didn't deserve it. The phone calls from my daughter came less frequently now. When they did, her voice was polite but distant, like we were both tiptoeing around a wound we weren't sure how to dress. I could sense the weight of Margaret's influence in every carefully chosen word, every pause that spoke louder than any apology. One evening, after dinner, I sat alone at the kitchen table, the house silent except for the ticking of the old clock above the stove. The events of the past week replayed in my mind like an old film reel. Margaret's false sweetness, her dismissive tone, her casual claims that the necklace was practically part of the family. I closed my eyes, the memory sharp and clear. Her hand brushing the photo of my daughter in the heirloom necklace, her lips curling in a smile that never reached her eyes. That's when it hit me. It hadn't been a careless request or a simple misunderstanding. Margaret had known exactly what she was doing. She'd played her part to perfection. The gracious mother-in-law, the helpful family member, the trusted confidant. She'd wrapped herself in a cloak of polite charm and let my daughter walk right into her web. I'd always thought of myself as a good judge of character. I'd navigated my own share of manipulative neighbors, smooth-talking salesmen, even a few distant relatives who'd tried to charm their way into my good graces. But I'd never imagined that the greatest threat to my family's legacy would come from within the family itself. I poured myself a cup of tea, my hands trembling as I lifted the mug to my lips. The first sip tasted bitter, like regret. How had I let this happen? How had I been so blind to the manipulation that had taken root in my own family? Because that's what it was. Manipulation. Margaret had sown seeds of doubt between me and my daughter, turning trust into suspicion, loyalty into hesitation. She'd convinced my daughter that sharing was generosity, that giving away something precious was a sign of belonging. But it wasn't generosity. It was theft dressed up in polite conversation. I thought back to the way Margaret's eyes had glinted when she'd spoken about the necklace. Family treasures should be appreciated, she'd said, her voice syrupy sweet. Some families don't always understand the importance of sharing. The realization hit me like a wave of ice water. She'd never seen that necklace as a symbol of our family's history or a promise passed from mother to daughter. She'd seen it as a prize, one she could claim, one she could flaunt as her own. And my daughter, sweet, trusting, eager to please, had played right into her hands. I set the mug down, the ceramic clinking against the wood of the table. The cold anger settled into my bones, a fire smoldering beneath it. Margaret had underestimated me. She'd mistaken my patience for weakness, my generosity for naivete. She didn't know the woman who'd built this family, who'd kept it strong through loss and heartache, who'd held the line when others had tried to chip away at what was ours. I stood and walked to the dresser, opening the jewelry box and letting my fingers brush the sapphire pendant. It felt cool against my skin, but a warmth spread through me, a resolve that ran deeper than any betrayal. Margaret thought she'd won. She thought she'd claimed a piece of my family's legacy, with nothing more than a smile and a borrowed charm. But she was about to learn that I wasn't a woman who let things go quietly. I woke the next morning with a single thought pressing on my mind like a stone. I had to know the truth. The necklace had always been more than a piece of jewelry. It was a promise, a legacy, a thread binding generations of strong, resilient women together. But now, after Margaret's meddling and my daughter's misplaced trust, I needed to see it for what it truly was. Not just sentiment, but its actual worth. Maybe it was the cold anger that had settled in me overnight, the realization that Margaret's motivations weren't just about petty control, but greed. Or maybe it was the fear that this heirloom, so precious to my heart, had become a pawn in someone else's game. Either way, I needed answers. So I wrapped the necklace carefully in a soft velvet pouch and slipped it into my handbag. The sapphire pendant glimmered in the morning light, its deep blue depths as inscrutable as the secrets it carried. I didn't tell my daughter I was leaving. I didn't owe her that. Not after the trust she'd handed so carelessly to Margaret. I left a note on the counter, just in case she came by. Gone out for errands. Back later. The local jewelry appraiser's office was tucked into the corner of an old brick building on Main Street, a relic from a time when craftsmanship mattered, and trust wasn't just a word people used to get what they wanted. I'd been there once, years ago, to have a ring resized after my husband passed. The bell over the door jingled as I stepped inside, the smell of old wood and polish filling my senses. Mr. Harris looked up from behind his cluttered desk, his glasses perched halfway down his nose. "Helen," he said, surprise in his voice. "It's been a while. What brings you in today?" I offered a tight smile, my hands trembling only slightly as I reached into my bag. "I need an appraisal," I said, my voice steady. "It's for a family heirloom." He nodded, gesturing for me to sit. I placed the pouch in his hands, the weight of it heavier than gold. He opened it carefully, his eyes widening slightly as the sapphire pendant spilled out into the light. He lifted it gently, turning it this way and that, his magnifier perched on his glasses. "Beautiful," he murmured. "Exquisite craftsmanship. I haven't seen filigree like this in decades." My heart tightened. "Can you tell me what it's worth?" I asked, the question heavy in my chest. He nodded, his expression serious as he worked. Minutes passed, each tick of the clock loud in the quiet shop. I watched his face, looking for any sign of what he was thinking. Finally, he set the necklace down and removed his magnifier, his gaze steady. "Helen," he said gently, "this isn't just valuable. It's a masterpiece." I blinked, my breath catching. How valuable? He leaned back, folding his hands. At auction, depending on the buyer, I'd estimate it could fetch anywhere from 50 to 70,000, perhaps more, given the provenance. The room swam for a moment. 50 to 70,000. More than I'd ever imagined, more than I'd ever thought to ask. "Are you sure?" I whispered, my voice small. He nodded. "I'd stake my reputation on it. The craftsmanship alone is rare, but the history, if you have the paperwork, the family story, adds significant value." I swallowed hard, the weight of that number pressing on my heart. Margaret hadn't just been playing at family politics. She'd seen the necklace for what it was, a prize, a treasure worth coveting and stealing. "Thank you," I said, my voice trembling but stronger than I'd expected. "I needed to know." He smiled kindly. "Of course. And Helen? Be careful who you trust with something like this." I nodded, the words hitting home with a painful clarity. As I drove home, the autumn leaves blurred past the window, a fiery cascade of reds and golds. I thought of my daughter's voice on the phone, her uncertainty, her need to please. I thought of Margaret's polished smile, the way she'd brushed aside my concerns like they were nothing more than old worries. Now I knew better. This wasn't about sharing, or family, or even trust. This was about greed. And if Margaret thought she could walk away with my family's legacy, she was about to learn just how wrong she was. Because sometimes the real worth of an heirloom isn't just in the dollars and cents. It's in the strength to stand up and reclaim what's yours. I pulled into my driveway, just as the last rays of the afternoon sun dipped below the horizon, casting the house in long, moody shadows. The knowledge of the necklace's true worth weighed heavily in my mind, but heavier still was the burden of knowing my daughter had unknowingly put it at risk. When I stepped inside, the house felt too quiet, the kind of silence that held its breath and waited for something to break. I set the velvet box on the kitchen table, the sapphire pendant glinting in the fading light, a silent witness to the lies that had been told. I was still staring at it when the door creaked open and my daughter stepped inside. Her hair was pulled back into a loose ponytail, her face pale and drawn, her eyes red as if she'd been crying. She froze when she saw the jewelry box on the table. "Mom," she whispered, her voice trembling. You went to get it." I didn't move. "I did," I said, each word measured. "Mr. Harris appraised it today. Did you know how much it's worth?" She shook her head, her hands twisting nervously. No. Margaret said it was just an old necklace, that it didn't matter. 50 to 70,000, I said, the number heavy in the air between us. That's what it's worth. Her eyes widened in shock, tears welling up. I didn't know, she whispered. I swear, Mom, I didn't know. I stood, every inch of me trembling with the effort it took to stay calm. You trusted her, I said, my voice low. You gave her something that wasn't yours to give. Why? She dropped her gaze to the floor, her tears spilling over. She was so kind at first, she whispered. She made me feel like I was part of her family. She said she wanted to wear the necklace just once, to show everyone that we were one big family now. A bitter laugh escaped me. And you believed her? She flinched, the shame etched in every line of her face. I wanted to, she said, her voice cracking. I wanted so badly for her to like me, for us to get along. She made it sound so innocent, so harmless. And then she started talking about how family should share everything, how I shouldn't be selfish. I felt my heart clench, the anger and sadness twisting together in a painful knot. She manipulated you, I said, my voice trembling. She played on your kindness and your need for approval. And you let her. She sank into the kitchen chair, burying her face in her hands. I'm so sorry, Mom, she sobbed. I didn't mean to hurt you. I thought if I said no, she'd think I wasn't good enough, that I didn't belong. I closed my eyes, the tears slipping down my cheeks despite my efforts to hold them back. You always belonged, I said, my voice breaking. You didn't need her approval or her acceptance. You had mine. You had the strength of every woman who came before you. She lifted her head, her eyes swollen and red. I know that now, she whispered. I just wish I'd realized it before I made this mess. I reached for her hand, my fingers trembling as I laced them through hers. We can fix this, I said softly. But you have to understand, trust, once broken, is hard to rebuild. She nodded, the tears falling freely now. I'll do whatever it takes, she said. I'll talk to Margaret. I'll make it right. I squeezed her hand gently, the anger slowly giving way to a fragile hope. We'll make it right, I said. Together. Because sometimes forgiveness doesn't come in grand gestures or flowery words. Sometimes it starts with tears and apologies, with the simple act of sitting across from each other and facing the truth. And as we sat there, the sapphire pendant between us, I realized that even the deepest wounds could begin to heal if we were brave enough to let them. I didn't sleep much that night. The storm had broken between my daughter and me, leaving behind a fragile calm that settled like mist over the house. But beneath that calm, the questions churned. What exactly had Margaret planned? Why had she been so eager to get her hands on the necklace? And most importantly, how long had she been scheming to make it hers? Morning came with a gray sky and a steady drizzle. I sat at the kitchen table, the coffee in my mug growing cold as I stared at the velvet box. The sapphire pendant glistened, a silent testament to the lies and betrayals that had threatened to steal it from me. When the phone rang, I knew before I even picked it up that it was my daughter. Her voice was hushed, anxious. Mom, she whispered. Margaret called this morning. She sounded off. She was asking if I'd given the necklace back to you. She said it was part of some arrangement between the families. I gripped the receiver, anger flaring in my chest. Arrangement, I spat. There was never an arrangement, and she knows it. My daughter's voice trembled. She said it was her right, as part of the family, that she should have access to things that belonged to the family. She even hinted that maybe Dad had intended for her to have it all along. A cold laugh escaped my lips. Your father never even met her, I said bitterly. He's been gone 10 years. Margaret's been your mother-in-law for, what, 3? And she's already trying to rewrite history. The words tumbled out in a rush then. How she'd smiled so sweetly that afternoon in my living room. How she'd stroked the photo of you wearing the necklace. How she'd laid the groundwork for this theft with every carefully chosen word. She's been planning this from the start, I said, my voice low and steady. She saw the value of the necklace, and she decided it should be hers. She's been manipulating you, planting seeds of doubt, making you feel like you owed her something. And you... I paused, my voice softening. You fell for it because you wanted to belong. Tears filled her voice. I didn't see it, Mom. I swear I didn't. I closed my eyes, the pain sharp in my chest. I know, sweetheart. I know. A silence fell between us, heavy but different this time. A silence born not from hurt, but from understanding. Mom, she said, her voice steadier now. What do we do? I let out a slow breath, the determination building like a storm inside me. We fight back, I said. We don't let her get away with it. That afternoon, I sat at my desk with the necklace laid out in front of me, the rain tapping against the window like a drumbeat. I opened my old ledger, the one where I kept notes about family heirlooms, stories passed down through the generations, and letters from my mother's own hand. I found the entry for the necklace, handwritten in faded ink. Given to me by my mother on my wedding day, the note read, to be passed to my daughter on hers. A legacy, a promise, and now, evidence. I photocopied the page and slipped it into an envelope, along with a copy of the appraisal from Mr. Harris. Proof that the necklace had always belonged to me, and by extension, to my daughter. And I thought about Margaret, so polished, so poised, so ready with her lies. I thought about the way she'd tried to twist the truth to suit her own ends, how she'd played on my daughter's insecurities like a master manipulator. I knew her type, the kind who smiled as they slipped the knife into your back, the kind who believed they could take whatever they wanted with a sweet word and a pat on the hand. But she didn't know me. She didn't know that I'd spent a lifetime learning how to stand tall, how to fight for what mattered. And she was about to find out. Because sometimes, the worst kind of thief doesn't break into your home in the middle of the night. Sometimes, they walk right through the front door with a smile on their face and an outstretched hand. But I wasn't going to let her walk away with my family's legacy. Not without a fight. And as the rain poured down outside, I felt the anger melt away, replaced by something stronger. Resolve. Margaret's greed might have sparked this battle, but it was my love for my daughter and the generations of women who'd come before us that would win it. The rain had stopped by the time I sat down at the kitchen table, but the world still felt damp and heavy, as though the storm had left a mark that wouldn't soon fade. I spread out the documents, my mother's handwritten note, Mr. Harris's appraisal, and the envelope holding the photos of the necklace through the years. Each piece felt like a puzzle, a key to unlocking the truth Margaret had tried so hard to twist. I stared at the necklace, now back in its velvet box, glinting beneath the dim kitchen light. Margaret had wanted it not for its beauty or history, but for the power it represented. And if she thought she could outmaneuver me, take my legacy, and leave me with nothing but regret, she had another thing coming. The first step in my plan was simple: gather the proof. I'd spent the better part of the morning combing through old family records, letters, and even receipts from the jeweler where my grandmother had had the clasp repaired decades ago. Every scrap of evidence, every story scribbled in the margins of old birthday cards and journals, became another weapon in my arsenal. The second step was more delicate. I had to ensure that Margaret's lies wouldn't hold up under scrutiny. That meant taking the story public, within the family at least. The necklace was too important to keep behind locked doors anymore. I called my daughter that evening. Her voice was cautious but warmer than before, the guilt still evident but mixed now with a thread of strength. "Mom," she answered, her voice a little hesitant. "I need you to come over," I said. "There's something we need to do together." She arrived an hour later, her hair still damp from the shower, her eyes rimmed with pink. She looked tired, older than her years, and my heart ached at what Margaret had done to her, to us. I sat her down at the table and spread out the papers. "This is our story," I said, my voice steady. "Every receipt, every photograph, every memory. This necklace was never just a pretty trinket. It's a legacy, one that Margaret tried to take from us." Her eyes filled with tears as she traced the lines of my mother's handwriting. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I didn't understand." I reached across the table, taking her hand in mine. "Now you do," I said gently. "And now it's time to take that understanding and turn it into action." She nodded, her tears falling freely now. "What do we do?" I took a deep breath, the plan forming in my mind like a puzzle clicking into place. "We're going to tell the truth," I said. "We're going to show the family exactly what Margaret tried to do, and we're going to do it on our terms. No more whispers, no more secrets. If she wants to play this game, then let's play." Her eyes widened, a flicker of hope sparking in them. "You mean a family meeting?" I smiled, a fierce pride blooming in my chest. "Exactly. We'll gather everyone, your husband, your siblings, even Margaret if she dares to show her face, and we'll lay it all out. The proof, the history, the manipulation, and when we're done, she'll have no place to hide." She hesitated, uncertainty flickering in her gaze. "But what if she denies it? What if she twists everything around like she always does?" I squeezed her hand. "That's why we have the documents, the photos, the receipts. Her words won't stand up to the truth, not when it's staring everyone in the face." A spark of determination ignited in her eyes. "Okay," she whispered. "Let's do it." I leaned back, the weight on my chest lifting just a little. This wasn't just about a necklace anymore. It was about reclaiming our family's story, our dignity, our strength. Margaret had underestimated me. She'd seen an aging mother with a kind smile, someone too polite to fight back. But she'd forgotten one thing. The necklace wasn't the only legacy I'd inherited. I'd inherited resilience, a spine of steel forged in the fires of grief and hardship, and I was ready to use it. Because sometimes, the best revenge isn't a shouted accusation or a slammed door. Sometimes it's a quiet plan unfolding, one carefully laid step at a time. And Margaret was about to learn that when a woman fights for her family, she doesn't stop until justice is served. The next morning dawned gray and heavy, as if the sky itself bore the weight of the secrets I carried. I woke with a sense of purpose that had been missing for too long. The necklace, safely nestled in its box, seemed to pulse with a quiet power, an unbroken thread linking me to generations of strong women who had fought their own battles. I'd spent the night replaying every conversation with Margaret, every smooth smile and carefully chosen word that had led us here. The plan was clear now. No more whispered accusations or polite confrontations that could be twisted and dismissed. I needed the law on my side. I called Mr. Jonathan Wells, the family lawyer who'd handled my late husband's affairs, and helped me navigate more than one delicate family matter. He'd always been discreet, but firm, a man who understood that sometimes strength came in the form of carefully chosen words and documents, rather than shouted arguments. He answered on the second ring, his voice warm but tinged with curiosity. Helen, it's been a while. How can I help you? I didn't waste time. Jonathan, I need to see you, I said, my voice steady. It's about the family heirloom, and it's urgent. There was a pause, long enough for him to register the seriousness in my tone. Of course, he said finally. Come in this afternoon. Bring everything you have. The drive to his office felt different this time. I wasn't just a mother or a widow. I was a guardian of something precious, and I refused to let anyone diminish that. Jonathan's office was in a tall brick building on the edge of downtown, a place that smelled of old wood and polished leather. The kind of place where secrets were kept safe and battles were fought with paper and ink. He greeted me in the waiting room, his eyes kind but sharp behind his glasses. Helen, he said, taking my hand. Let's see what we're dealing with. I laid everything out on his broad oak desk. The handwritten notes from my mother, the appraisal from Mr. Harris, the photographs of the necklace worn by generations of women in my family. Each piece told a story Margaret had tried to rewrite. Jonathan examined everything carefully, his expression unreadable. Finally, he sat back in his chair and steepled his fingers. Helen, he said, his tone serious, this is more than enough to establish your ownership. The provenance is rock solid. No court would question your claim. Relief washed over me, but it was tempered by the bitterness of betrayal. That's good, I said, my voice trembling just a little. Because Margaret is trying to take it from me. She's been telling my daughter it belongs to her, that it's part of some family arrangement. Jonathan's eyebrows shot up. Family arrangement? She's got nerve. I'll give her that. I let out a bitter laugh. You don't know the half of it. She's manipulative, Jonathan. She made my daughter feel like giving it to her was the right thing to do, like it would make her part of the family. He shook his head, his expression hardening. That's not just manipulative, Helen. That's theft, plain and simple. And while it may not have started with criminal intent, the fact that she refused to return it without a fight makes her position indefensible. He opened a drawer and pulled out a folder. I can draft a formal letter, he said. A cease and desist, demanding that she relinquish any claim to the necklace and acknowledge your sole ownership. It's not just about getting the necklace back. It's about setting the record straight. I nodded, the plan crystallizing in my mind. Do it, I said. I want her to know she can't rewrite our family's history with a smile and a lie. Jonathan gave me a small, approving smile. I thought you might say that, he said. I'll have the letter ready by tomorrow. And Helen, if she tries to fight it, we can take it to court. You have the documents, the history, the proof. She doesn't stand a chance. I felt something shift inside me then. A release of the fear and doubt that had been eating away at me since Margaret first laid eyes on that necklace. This wasn't just about a piece of jewelry anymore. It was about respect, about legacy, about teaching people like Margaret that some things couldn't be stolen with charm and cunning. As I gathered my papers and prepared to leave, Jonathan put a hand on my arm. Helen, he said, his voice gentle. You've done the right thing. Sometimes family can be the hardest battle to fight, but you fought it with grace and strength. That's something to be proud of. I nodded, tears pricking the corners of my eyes. Thank you, Jonathan, I said, for everything. Outside, the sun had broken through the clouds, casting a warm light over the street. I took a deep breath, feeling stronger than I had in weeks. Margaret might have started this fight, but I would finish it. And she would learn that this family's legacy was not for sale, or for the taking. The invitation arrived 3 days later, an embossed card on heavy paper, so formal it felt like an afterthought to an unwanted guest. Margaret's dinner party. An evening to celebrate family, the card read in delicate script. We would be honored by your presence. Honored. The word tasted bitter on my tongue. She might have crafted it with her polished charm, but I knew better. It wasn't an invitation. It was a test, a performance to show the world that she still held sway, that I was nothing more than an afterthought at her carefully curated table. But I'd accepted without hesitation. I'd spent too many years letting people like Margaret assume they could write me out of the story with a polite smile and a gentle nudge. Not tonight. Tonight, I would sit at her table, but I'd bring my own strength, my own legacy, and the truth. The night of the party, I dressed deliberately. I chose a navy blue dress, simple but elegant, and a string of pearls my mother had given me on my wedding day. I left the necklace safely at home, resting in its velvet box like a promise of what would come next. As I pulled up to Margaret's house, a sprawling estate with manicured hedges and a driveway lined with lanterns, I felt the old nerves flutter in my chest. But they weren't the same as before. They weren't the nerves of a woman uncertain of her place. They were the nerves of a woman who knew the storm was coming and was ready to stand in its eye. Margaret met me at the door, her smile wide and brittle, her eyes calculating. "Helen," she purred, her voice like honey laced with vinegar. "I'm so glad you could join us." "Of course," I replied, matching her smile with one of my own. "Wouldn't miss it." Inside, the house gleamed with an artificial warmth, flickering candles, soft music, and the hum of polite conversation. The table was set with gleaming silverware and crystal glasses, each place card written in Margaret's neat, precise hand. My name sat at the far end of the table, a calculated distance from the head where she presided. As the other guests arrived, her friends, her carefully chosen allies, I could feel the undercurrent of curiosity. They knew something had happened. They'd heard the whispers of tension and betrayal. But Margaret had spun her web well, and tonight she meant to hold court. Dinner began with small talk, polite chatter about the weather, the latest charity galas, the rising price of imported flowers. But beneath it all, I felt Margaret's gaze on me, sharp and assessing, waiting for me to slip, to show a crack in the armor she'd underestimated. She raised her glass, her voice smooth and confident. "To family," she declared. "May we always remember the bonds that unite us, and the treasures we share." The words were a challenge, a thinly veiled claim to the necklace and everything it represented. I met her eyes, my own smile unwavering. "Family," I echoed, "and the trust that binds us." A flicker of irritation crossed her face, gone in an instant, replaced by that brittle smile. "Of course," she replied sweetly. "Speaking of trust, I'm so glad we could all come together tonight to reaffirm what truly matters." I leaned forward slightly, my tone calm, but edged with steel. "Trust is everything," I said. "It's what keeps a family strong, and what breaks it when it's betrayed." The table fell silent. Forks paused in midair. Eyes darted between us, the tension thick as smoke. Margaret's smile tightened, the corners of her mouth strained. "Helen, dear, I do hope you're not implying—" I cut her off, my voice steady. "I'm not implying anything. I'm stating it plainly. Family means respect, and respect means not taking what doesn't belong to you." She stiffened, her eyes hardening, but I saw the flash of panic beneath the surface. She hadn't expected me to stand my ground, to call her out in front of her carefully chosen audience. "Margaret," I continued, my voice calm but cold, "I know what you tried to do. I know about the necklace, and I know about the lies you told to justify it." A collective gasp rippled around the table. Margaret's mask cracked, her composure slipping for just an instant before she composed herself again. "I think perhaps you've misunderstood," she began, her voice trembling with manufactured sweetness. I only wanted to. To what? I asked, my voice slicing through the silence. To take something that was never yours? To rewrite history to suit your own ends? Her lips thinned. Helen, let's not make a scene. Oh, I think the time for polite scenes is over, I said, my voice steady. Because tonight, Margaret, I came not to make a scene, but to make things right. The guests sat frozen, the silence ringing louder than any words. After the dinner party ended, the air in Margaret's house was thick with tension and unsaid words. Guests left quickly, their polite smiles brittle and thin as glass, as if they'd been handed something sharp and didn't know how to hold it without cutting themselves. Margaret tried to play the gracious hostess until the very last goodbye, but I saw it in her eyes. That flicker of something feral, the realization that her carefully spun web had begun to unravel. As the last car pulled away, leaving the driveway empty and silent, I turned to leave. But before I could make it to the door, Margaret's hand shot out, her fingers gripping my wrist with a force that surprised me. Helen, she said, her voice a trembling hush. You can't just come into my home and humiliate me like that. That necklace. I yanked my hand free, her touch leaving a phantom burn. That necklace was never yours, I snapped, my voice low and steady. And you know it. Her eyes, once so polished and polite, narrowed with something close to rage. I only took what I thought was owed, she hissed. Your daughter. My daughter was manipulated, I spat, the anger burning hot in my chest. And you took advantage of her kindness. For a moment, the mask slipped completely, and I saw her for who she truly was. A woman who believed the world owed her something simply because she'd decided to take it. With a trembling breath, she looked away, her hands knotting together in a show of feigned humility. Helen, she said, her voice soft. You don't understand. I've built a home for your daughter. I've given her a place in my family. That necklace. I cut her off, my tone like ice. That necklace is a piece of my family's history, a promise passed down through generations. It's not a prize to be claimed because you decided you deserved it. She flinched as if I'd slapped her. But I wasn't finished. You wanted the necklace because you thought it would make you part of our family's legacy. But legacies aren't bought or stolen. They're earned. And you, Margaret, haven't earned a single thread of ours. The silence stretched between us, taut and trembling. Her lips pressed into a thin line, and her eyes darted to the box I clutched in my hands. Give it to me, she demanded, her voice cracking under the weight of her own desperation. It belongs here. I shook my head slowly. No, I said, my voice firm. It belongs with the women who built this family, who protected it, who honored it. It doesn't belong to someone who thinks respect can be demanded instead of earned. She stepped forward, her eyes wild now, her voice a sharp hiss. You think you're better than me? I didn't flinch. I know I am, I said, because I don't steal from the people I claim to love. For a long moment, she just stood there, her hands trembling at her sides, her lips moving soundlessly like she wanted to scream, but couldn't find the air. Then, with a sound halfway between a sob and a growl, she turned away and disappeared into the shadowed hallway, leaving me alone in her immaculate living room. I stood there, the necklace box clutched to my chest, my heart pounding with the weight of everything that had happened. The fight wasn't over, not by a long shot, but the truth had been spoken, and no amount of lies or false smiles could erase it now. As I stepped outside into the cool night air, the moon hung low in the sky, casting silver light across the driveway. I took a deep breath, the chill clearing my head. Margaret had tried to steal my family's legacy, but she'd underestimated the strength of the women who'd worn that necklace before me, and the woman who wore it now. I knew the road ahead would still be difficult. Margaret would try to twist the story, to spin her web of lies for anyone who'd listen. But I had something she didn't: the truth, and the resolve to see it through. As I got into my car, the velvet box resting on the seat beside me, I glanced at it one last time. It wasn't just jewelry. It was the thread that connected me to my mother, my grandmother, and every woman who'd come before me. And no one, not even Margaret, could ever steal that. The days after the dinner party blurred together like raindrops on glass, an endless drizzle of hushed conversations, worried glances, and half-finished cups of coffee. I kept the necklace close, the velvet box a constant reminder of the battle still brewing beneath the polite smiles and strained laughter. My daughter called often, her voice filled with apologies and nervous questions. Each time, I reassured her that I was handling it, but a part of me ached to make her see that Margaret's schemes were more than just petty games. They were a threat to everything our family had built. It was time to end the charade once and for all. Margaret had underestimated me at every turn, assuming I would shrink from conflict and bury the truth under a polite smile. But I'd spent my life learning that the strongest women weren't the ones who shouted the loudest. They were the ones who stood their ground when everyone else tried to push them aside. So I called my daughter and told her we were hosting a family gathering at my house. Not a dinner party, not a casual get-together, a meeting, a reckoning. She arrived first, her eyes wary but hopeful. "Mom," she whispered as she stepped into the living room, "are you sure about this?" I smiled, the resolve settling over me like armor. "It's time they knew the truth," I said. "All of it." Margaret was the last to arrive, sweeping in with her usual elegance, her smile a polished mask. "Helen," she purred, her tone sweet as honey. "What a lovely idea. I do so love a family gathering." I didn't smile back. Instead, I gestured to the empty chair across from me, the space at the center of the room where everyone's eyes would land. "Please, Margaret," I said, my voice calm but cold. "Sit down." She hesitated just a moment, just long enough for the others to see the flicker of uncertainty in her eyes, then settled into the chair, her smile slipping ever so slightly. I took a deep breath and opened the folder on the coffee table. "I think it's time we talked about the necklace," I began, my voice steady. Margaret's eyes darted around the room, seeking allies. But the others, my daughter, her husband, even the quiet cousin who rarely spoke, watched in tense silence. "Helen," Margaret said, her voice laced with feigned patience, "I've already explained." I held up a hand, cutting her off. "No, Margaret, you've spun enough stories. Now it's time for the truth." I slid the documents across the table. The handwritten note from my mother, the receipts, the appraisal, the photographs of generations of women wearing the necklace on their wedding days. Proof, in black and white, that the necklace had never belonged to Margaret and never would. She stared at the papers, her face pale. These are old papers, Helen," she stammered. They show a legacy," I said, my voice growing stronger. "A legacy you tried to steal with your lies and manipulations. You preyed on my daughter's kindness, her desire to fit in, and you twisted that into a weapon to take what was never yours." Margaret's eyes flashed with something sharp. Fear or anger, I couldn't tell. "You're making too much of this," she hissed. "It was a misunderstanding. A simple loan." "A loan you refused to return," I snapped. "A loan you turned into a claim of ownership. You called it family tradition, but you didn't care about family. You cared about power." Silence. Heavy and suffocating. My daughter's eyes were wide, tears brimming but not falling. She reached for my hand, her grip trembling but strong. Margaret's mask cracked then. The sweet smile fell away, replaced by a cold, hard glare. "You think you're so righteous," she spat, "but you're just a bitter old woman clinging to the past." I leaned forward, my gaze steady and unwavering. "Better to cling to the past than to steal from the future," I said. "You thought you could rewrite our story, but you forgot that some of us remember every word." She opened her mouth to argue, but no sound came. The room was silent, everyone watching, waiting. I stood, the folder in my hands, the necklace safe in its velvet box beside me. "This ends here," I said, my voice resolute. "You will never touch what belongs to this family again." Margaret rose abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. She opened her mouth to protest, but the weight of the room pressed down on her. She turned and fled, her heels clicking like a retreating drumbeat. I looked around the room, meeting every eye. "The truth is, the strongest armor we have," I said, my voice trembling but proud. And today, we wore it well. The house felt different after Margaret fled, like a storm had passed through, leaving the air charged with something that wasn't quite relief. My daughter sat beside me, her hands trembling slightly, eyes red from unshed tears. She hadn't said a word since Margaret's retreat, and the silence between us felt fragile, as if one wrong word might send everything shattering to the ground. I reached across the table and laid my hand over hers, the same way my mother had done for me all those years ago, when I'd stumbled under the weight of my own decisions. "Sweetheart," I said gently, "I know this is hard." Her breath hitched, and she finally looked at me, eyes wide with confusion and pain. "Mom, I didn't know," she whispered. "I thought she made you believe you owed her." I finished for her, my voice steady. "That's what people like her do. They take your kindness, your trust, and they twist it until you can't tell right from wrong." She shook her head, tears spilling now, trailing down her cheeks. "I thought if I just kept the peace, if I gave her what she wanted, she'd finally accept me. I wanted her to love me." A pang shot through my heart, the same old wound opening again. I'd spent years worrying that I hadn't done enough to prepare her for this, that I'd made it too easy for her to doubt her own worth. "Oh, honey," I whispered, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Her love was always conditional, but mine never was. You didn't have to give her that necklace to be worthy of love." Her sobs deepened, raw and broken. "I feel so stupid," she choked. "I let her take something that wasn't hers. I let her lie about our family." I shook my head, a sad smile on my lips. "Number you trusted the wrong person, but that doesn't make you weak. It makes you human." She squeezed my hand, her grip trembling. "What do I do now?" she asked, her voice small. "If I stand up to her, it'll tear the family apart. Dad's caught in the middle, and I exhaled slowly, the weight of the moment pressing down on me. "Sometimes, sweetheart, you have to choose between keeping the peace and standing up for what's right. You can't do both." Her eyes darted away, staring at the floor. "But if I choose the truth, she'll hate me," she whispered. "And maybe Dad will too." I paused, my heart aching. "He might," I admitted, "at least at first. But lies built on fear never last. Truth, no matter how painful, will always find its way to the surface." She shook her head, tears dripping onto the table. "I don't want to hurt anyone." I leaned closer, my voice firm. "I know, but Margaret's already hurt us, all of us, with her lies. Choosing the truth doesn't make you the villain. It makes you the brave one." She stared at me, her eyes wide and searching. "How did you get so strong, Mom?" she asked, her voice a whisper. I smiled, the memory of my own mother's strength flooding back. "Because I had to," I said softly. "Because this family's story matters. Because sometimes the only way to protect what you love is to stand up to those who try to steal it." She took a deep breath, her shoulders straightening, her eyes drying. "Then I'll do it," she said, her voice trembling but certain. "I'll stand up to her. I'll tell Dad the truth. I'll choose our family's legacy over her lies." Pride welled in my chest, warm and fierce. I squeezed her hand. "That's all I could ever ask of you," I said. Outside, the sun had begun to set, casting the world in a golden light that felt like a promise. She stood slowly, wiping her eyes. "I'm going to talk to Dad," she said. "He deserves to know." I nodded, my heart full. "Yes," I said. "He does." As she turned to leave, I watched her go with a sense of peace I hadn't felt in days. She wasn't the same girl who'd handed Margaret that necklace with trembling hands. She was stronger now, wiser. Because sometimes the hardest choices reveal who we really are. And my daughter had just proven that she was every bit the woman I'd raised her to be. Margaret had tried to break us. But in the end, she'd only made us stronger. And now, the real healing could begin. After my daughter left to speak with her father, I sat alone in the living room, the shadows stretching longer as the sun dipped below the horizon. The weight of the conversation hung in the air, thick and unyielding, but beneath it lay a current of resolve, a determination I hadn't felt in years. Margaret's lies had nearly undone what generations of women had built, but now the tide had turned. My daughter's choice had opened a door to healing, but there was still one piece left to play: the paper trail. I gathered the documents from the battered oak chest where I kept our family's most important papers. Each envelope, each yellowed receipt, each fragile letter felt like a lifeline to the past, a testament to the legacy Margaret had tried to claim as her own. There was my grandmother's handwritten letter, penned in elegant script on thick cream stationery, its words still vivid after all these years. "To my dearest daughter, on the day you wed, this necklace has belonged to our family for generations, a symbol of strength and resilience. Guard it well, and pass it to your own daughter in time." A tear slipped down my cheek as I traced the lines with my finger. My grandmother's hand on the page felt like her hand on my shoulder, steady and sure. Next came the receipt from the jeweler, dated decades ago, faded but still legible. It bore the name of the shop where the clasp had been repaired after my mother's wedding. A small thing, perhaps, but enough to prove that the necklace had been in our family's possession long before Margaret ever darkened our doorstep. I flipped through photos, black and white snapshots of my mother on her wedding day, the necklace glinting proudly at her throat. Another of me, decades later, the same necklace catching the light as I held my newborn daughter. Proof of continuity, of love passed down like a secret language between mothers and daughters. And then, the most recent piece, the appraisal from Mr. Harris, his signature crisp and unmistakable at the bottom. A valuation not just of the necklace's monetary worth, but of its irreplaceable place in our family's story. With trembling hands, I assembled the documents in a neat folder. This was my shield against Margaret's false claims, a shield forged in truth, and ink, and memories that no smile or polite word could erase. I called Jonathan Wells the next morning. His voice was warm but businesslike. "Helen," he said, "I trust you're ready?" I took a breath. More than ever. An hour later, I sat in his office, the folder between us like a battleground. He flipped through each piece, his sharp eyes catching every detail. When he finished, he leaned back and nodded. "This," he said, tapping the folder, "is ironclad." She can't dispute this without perjuring herself. Relief and exhaustion washed over me. "Thank you," I whispered. She made my daughter doubt me. She made her doubt our whole family." Jonathan's expression softened. "People like Margaret thrive on doubt, Helen. But doubt can't stand up to facts." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a draft of the cease and desist letter. "I've incorporated the documents into the letter," he explained. "This makes it clear that the necklace is yours, and always has been. If she pushes this any further, we'll be ready." I nodded, the weight in my chest finally beginning to lift. "Send it," I said, my voice firm. "Let her see that we're not afraid of the truth." He smiled, his respect evident in his eyes. "Consider it done." As I left his office, the folder clutched tightly in my hands. I felt a strength in my spine I hadn't known I possessed. Margaret had tried to steal more than a necklace. She'd tried to steal our family's story, to replace it with her own version of events. But now, armed with the documents that bore witness to generations of love and sacrifice, I was ready to face her. Because sometimes the greatest power isn't in loud words or heated arguments. Sometimes it's in a paper trail, a quiet, undeniable record of the truth. And Margaret was about to learn that my family's legacy wasn't just written in jewelry. It was written in every scrap of paper, every signature, every faded letter that proved where we came from and who we were. As I drove home, the folder safe in the passenger seat, I thought of my daughter and the choice she'd made. Her strength gave me hope that someday she'd tell her own daughter this story, not just of the necklace, but of the fight it took to protect it. Because the paper trail didn't just prove ownership. It proved that sometimes, even the smallest document can carry the weight of generations. And that truth, no matter how long it takes, always finds its way home. Jonathan's letter went out the next morning. A cold, formal document that carried the weight of every signature, every date, every piece of proof I'd spent weeks collecting. It left no room for interpretation, no space for excuses or tears. It simply stated the truth. The necklace was mine. Always had been. Always would be. I knew Margaret would receive it by that afternoon. I also knew she would never call me first. That wasn't her way. The waiting was the hardest part. The hours crawled by, heavy with anticipation. I busied myself with small tasks, watering the plants, folding laundry. But my mind kept drifting to the image of her reading the letter, her perfectly manicured hands trembling, her eyes darting across the page as she realized the game was over. The call came at dusk. I recognized her number before I even answered, and I let it ring twice before picking up, my pulse steady. "Margaret," I said, my voice calm, no hint of the storm that raged beneath my ribs. There was a pause, longer than I expected, and when she finally spoke, her voice was icy, clipped, every syllable sharp enough to cut. "You think you've won," she spat, her words laced with venom. "You think a few old papers and a self-righteous lawyer can erase everything I've done for this family?" I let her words hang in the air for a moment, the silence a buffer between us. "I think," I said quietly, "that the truth has a way of shining through, no matter how hard you try to bury it." She let out a bitter laugh, one that held no humor. "Truth," she sneered. "You think you're the only one who gets to define that? I gave your daughter a home. I gave her a place in this family. And how do you repay me? By humiliating me in front of everyone?" I clenched the phone tighter, my knuckles white. "You gave her a home built on lies and manipulation," I said evenly. "You twisted her kindness into something you could exploit. That's not family, Margaret. That's control." Her breath hitched, a small, involuntary sound that told me my words had hit their mark. "She was supposed to be mine," she whispered. and for the first time, I heard something raw and vulnerable in her voice. I did everything I could to make her feel welcome, to make her love me. But she still runs back to you. A pang of sadness cut through me, unexpected but undeniable. She's not a prize to be won, I said softly. She's a person, and you can't buy her love with stolen heirlooms and false promises. For a moment, there was silence. Then a sharp, trembling exhale, like the last gasp of a dying flame. You think you've won? She said again, but this time her voice was small, broken. You think you're so righteous. I swallowed hard, my own voice firm. It was never about winning, Margaret, I said. It was about protecting what matters, about making sure my daughter knows that some things can't be taken from her, no matter how hard someone tries. She didn't respond. I could almost see her, standing in her immaculate kitchen, the cold marble counters gleaming in the half-light, her reflection staring back at her from every polished surface. Finally, she spoke, her voice brittle. Fine, she said. Keep your precious necklace, but don't think this is over. Families remember betrayal. My heart ached at the bitterness in her words. So do mothers, I said quietly. And I will never forget how you tried to turn my daughter against me. She didn't reply. The line went dead, the silence in my ear ringing louder than any words she could have spoken. I set the phone down and took a deep breath. Margaret's defeat wasn't the kind that ended in tears or apologies. It was the kind that festered, slow and bitter, like a wound she'd nursed for years. But it wasn't my job to heal her. I looked at the folder on the table, the documents neatly stacked like a fortress. The necklace lay inside its box, a symbol of resilience, of family, of the strength that Margaret had underestimated. She might have believed that power came from control, from forcing others to bend to her will. But I knew better. Power came from truth, from standing firm when others tried to tear you down, from loving fiercely and protecting the ones who mattered most. As the sun slipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple, I felt something shift inside me, a quiet peace settling in where the worry had lived for too long. Margaret had lost, and she knew it. Her bitterness would be her burden to carry, not mine. The morning light filtered through the curtains, catching on the polished surface of the oak table where I had placed the jewelry box the night before. Its velvet cover seemed to glow in the soft light, a quiet symbol of the victory hard won after weeks of lies and manipulation. I ran my fingers over the edges of the box, feeling the weight of generations resting inside. My grandmother's necklace, our necklace, was finally back where it belonged. No amount of Margaret's scheming could erase its history or its meaning. The phone rang, its sudden shrillness breaking the hush of the morning. I hesitated a moment before answering, half expecting Margaret's bitter voice. Instead, it was my daughter. "Mom," she said, her voice steadier than it had been in weeks. "Can I come over?" "Of course," I replied, a small smile curving my lips. "I have something I think you need to see." She arrived 20 minutes later, eyes cautious but hopeful, her hands twisting nervously at her sides. I led her to the table and gently pushed the box toward her. Her breath caught as she reached for it, her fingers trembling. "You got it back," she whispered, her voice filled with relief and wonder. I nodded, my own heart swelling with emotion. Jonathan's letter was the final nail in Margaret's coffin. She didn't even try to fight it after that. I think she knew, deep down, that the truth would always win. She opened the box slowly, the hinges creaking like a door to the past. The necklace lay inside, its sapphire catching the light and throwing it back in a dance of blues and silvers. It's so beautiful, she murmured, tears welling in her eyes. I'm so sorry I let her take it from you. From us. I reached across the table, taking her hand in mine. You didn't let her take it, I said gently. She took advantage of your trust, of your desire to belong. That's not your fault. It's hers. She blinked back tears, her grip tightening. But I should have known. No, I interrupted softly, shaking my head. You're not the one who needed to know. She was the one who needed to understand that family isn't something you can buy or steal. It's something you build, one moment at a time, one act of love after another. She lifted the necklace from the box, the delicate chain slipping through her fingers like water. It belongs to us, she said, her voice trembling. Not to her. Yes, I said firmly. It always has. And someday, you'll pass it on to your daughter, and she'll know the story, not just of the necklace, but of the strength it took to keep it where it belonged. She laid the necklace back in its box with a reverence that made my heart ache in the best way. Thank you, Mom, she whispered, for fighting for me, for us. I brushed a tear from my cheek, my voice thick with emotion. That's what mothers do, I said. We fight, we protect, and we make sure our daughters know their worth, no matter what anyone else tries to tell them. She smiled through her tears, a light in her eyes I hadn't seen in weeks. I love you, she said, her voice strong. I love you too, I whispered, my heart swelling with pride. The air in the room felt lighter somehow, as if the weight of Margaret's deceit had finally lifted. I knew the battle wasn't just about a necklace. It was about a legacy, a chain of women bound together not by blood alone, but by the strength to stand up for what was right. As my daughter slipped the box into her purse, I saw the determination in her eyes. She was ready to carry the story forward, to protect it for the next generation. Margaret's defeat had been bitter, but it was final. The necklace was home, and so was the truth. In that quiet room, with the sun streaming in and the weight of the past finally at rest, I felt a peace I hadn't known in years. Because some battles aren't won with shouting or threats. They're won with patience, with love, and with the unwavering belief that the truth is stronger than any lie. And as I watched my daughter leave, the necklace safe in her hands, I knew one thing for certain. The heirloom had found its rightful place, not just around her neck, but in her heart. And that was a victory no one could ever steal. The house was quiet after my daughter left, the soft tick of the clock on the mantel the only sound filling the space. The air felt lighter now, the tension of the past weeks dissipating like morning mist. Yet beneath the relief, there lingered a weight, a lesson that had taken a lifetime to learn, but had never been so clear. Margaret's departure had been more than just the end of a feud over a necklace. It had been a stark reminder of how easily kindness could be twisted into weakness. How a single act of trust could be used as a weapon by someone determined to take what they hadn't earned. I sat down at the kitchen table, the wood worn smooth by years of family meals and conversations both mundane and profound. My fingers traced the grain absently as I thought of the necklace, how it had nearly slipped through my grasp because I'd been too polite to say no, too eager to keep the peace. A bitter smile tugged at the corners of my mouth. I'd been taught all my life that keeping the family together meant swallowing my pride, avoiding conflict, letting others have their way. But Margaret had taught me, harshly but undeniably, that sometimes keeping the peace meant sacrificing your own dignity. I'd let her in, thinking that welcoming her with open arms would heal old wounds. But she'd seen my kindness as a weakness to be exploited. She'd woven her web of lies so skillfully that even my own daughter had doubted me. And that was the hardest part. The way she'd nearly convinced my daughter that giving up her heritage was the price of acceptance. A pang of guilt shot through me. Had I failed to teach her that boundaries weren't walls? They were lines of respect, drawn to protect the heart and the legacy we carried? I stood and walked over to the small chest that held the family albums, snapshots of generations of women, each with her own battles, her own scars. My grandmother had taught me that a woman's strength wasn't in the volume of her voice, but in the firmness of her stance. "You teach people how to treat you," she'd told me once, her eyes sharp as she set down her sewing. "Every time you let someone cross a line, you show them where they can tread next." Margaret had crossed a line, and I'd let her, for too long. I thought of my daughter, her tearful apology still echoing in my ears. She'd learned a painful lesson too, that love and loyalty didn't mean surrendering your worth. She'd seen firsthand how easily boundaries blurred when you were desperate to belong. But she'd chosen the truth in the end. She'd chosen her family's story over the easy lie. And maybe that was the real victory, that she'd learned to draw her own lines to say, "This far, no further." I picked up the old family photo. My mother, young and determined, wearing the necklace on her wedding day. Her eyes seemed to meet mine, steady and knowing. She'd known hardship too, fights over inheritance, relatives who'd tried to take what wasn't theirs. But she'd taught me that family wasn't just about blood. It was about trust. And trust demanded boundaries. Margaret had tried to steal not just a necklace, but our family's sense of unity. She'd thought that if she smiled sweetly enough, if she twisted her words cleverly enough, she could take what she wanted without consequence. But she hadn't counted on the paper trail. She hadn't counted on the documents that told the story she couldn't rewrite. And she hadn't counted on a woman like me, someone who'd spent her life keeping the peace, finally realizing that sometimes peace was too high a price. I sat back down, the photo still in my hand. My mother's eyes seemed to dare me to say it out loud. "Boundaries," I whispered. "They're not a betrayal. They're a promise, to myself and to those who come after me, that our legacy won't be stolen by a smile." I thought of the necklace, now safe in its box, and of the generations of women who'd worn it proudly. I'd fought for them too, for the stories they'd carried, the sacrifices they'd made. And I thought of my daughter, standing in my kitchen with tears in her eyes, but strength in her heart. She was the next link in that chain, and she'd learned that love didn't mean letting someone walk all over you. It meant knowing when to stand up, when to say enough. Margaret might never understand that. She'd see my refusal to bend as betrayal, my insistence on respect as coldness. But that was her burden to bear, not mine. I'd learned my lesson, finally and irrevocably, and I'd made sure my daughter had learned it too. It had been a week since the cease and desist letter and the final conversation with Margaret. A week since the necklace had returned to its rightful place. The house felt lighter now, as if a thick fog had finally lifted, revealing the warmth and the laughter I'd almost forgotten we could share. My daughter and I sat on the front porch that Saturday afternoon, the late summer sun casting a honeyed glow over the yard. She held a cup of tea in her hands, her fingers tracing the rim, her eyes fixed on the horizon. "I'm sorry, Mom," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "For everything." I reached out and gently took her hand, feeling the tension in her fingers, the tremor of regret and fear. "You don't have to apologize, sweetheart," I said, my voice steady. "We both made mistakes. We both trusted someone who didn't deserve it." She looked at me then, tears brimming but not falling. "I let her get between us. I let her make me doubt you." I squeezed her hand, my heart aching with a love too big to hold. "And I let her think she could," I said softly. "I thought being polite was enough, that keeping the peace meant giving in. But sometimes, keeping the peace means standing up for yourself, and for the people you love." She let out a breath that sounded like it carried the weight of the world. I was so scared of losing my place in their family, she confessed. I thought if I didn't go along with her, they'd shut me out. But in the end, it was you I almost lost. I pulled her into a hug then, holding her like I had when she was small, and the world felt too big. You didn't lose me, I whispered against her hair. You never could. I'm your mother. That doesn't change. She pulled back just enough to look at me, her eyes shining. I love you, Mom. I never said that enough. I smiled through my own tears. I love you too, I said, my voice thick with emotion. More than you'll ever know. For a long while, we sat in silence, the sounds of birds and wind filling the spaces where words weren't needed. She leaned her head on my shoulder like she used to, and I felt the years melt away. Finally, she straightened, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. I want to make things right, she said. Not just with you, but with our family. I want to know the stories, the traditions. I want to be part of it again. I took a deep breath, the promise of a new beginning blooming in my chest. Then let's start, I said, my voice gentle but firm. Let's start with the necklace, with the women who wore it before us. Let's talk about your grandmother and her mother before her. Let's remember who we are and who we've always been. She nodded, a determined smile curving her lips. Okay, she said. Tell me everything. So I did. I told her about my mother, a woman with a spine of steel and a heart big enough to hold the world. I told her about my grandmother, who'd kept the family together through wars and heartbreak, who'd taught me that a woman's strength wasn't in her silence, but in her voice. I told her about the necklace, the hands that had fastened it around their necks, the promises made, the tears shed, the laughter shared. Each story felt like laying a brick in the foundation of something new, something stronger. She listened with rapt attention, her eyes shining with wonder and pride. I never knew, she whispered. I never knew how much this meant. I smiled, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. Now you do, I said. And someday, you'll tell your daughter, and she'll tell hers. That's how legacies are made, sweetheart. Not through stolen treasures, but through love and memory. She leaned in and hugged me again, her arms tight around my shoulders. Thank you, she whispered, for not giving up on me. I held her just as tightly. Never, I said, not for a single second. The sun dipped lower, the shadows stretching across the yard. But the darkness didn't scare me anymore. It only made the light seem brighter, warmer. Because even though Margaret had tried to break us, we were still here, mother and daughter, stronger than before, our bond forged in the fires of conflict and betrayal, but tempered with love. A new beginning wasn't always easy. It wasn't always gentle. But it was ours. That Sunday morning, the sky was a gentle gray, the kind that seemed to hush the world into a soft, contemplative silence. I stood in the kitchen, a fresh pot of coffee brewing, its aroma filling the air with warmth and comfort. My daughter joined me, her hair pulled back in a loose ponytail, a sleepy smile on her face. Morning, Mom, she murmured, reaching for a mug. Morning, sweetheart, I replied, watching her move around the kitchen with a familiarity that brought tears to my eyes. It felt good, normal, to have her here again, not just in body, but in heart. She settled across from me at the table, the same table where we'd shared so many meals, so many conversations, both big and small. I've been thinking a lot about what you said, she began, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug. About our family, our legacy. I nodded, my heart steady. It's not just about a necklace, I said. It's about who we are, what we stand for. It's about respect, about standing up for ourselves and each other. She looked down, her eyes thoughtful. I want to help protect that, she said, her voice quiet but firm. I want to make sure no one ever tries to take it from us again. A warmth bloomed in my chest, pride mingled with relief. That's all I've ever wanted, I told her. For you to know your worth. For you to feel like you belong in this family. Not because you gave in to someone's demands, but because you've earned your place with every choice you've made. She reached into her purse and pulled out the velvet box, setting it gently between us. I think, she said, her voice trembling just a little, that this belongs with you for now. I stared at the box, the necklace's history and weight settling in the air around us. Are you sure? I asked, my heart swelling with emotion. She nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. Yes, she whispered. You're the one who fought for it. You're the one who showed me what it means to be strong. Someday, when I'm ready, I'll wear it. But for now, it's yours. I reached across the table, taking her hand in mine. Thank you, I said, my voice thick, for trusting me, for believing in what we've built together. She squeezed my hand, her smile radiant. You taught me how, she said simply. The room seemed to glow with a quiet strength, a sense of completion that wrapped around us like a well-worn quilt. The necklace wasn't just a piece of jewelry, it was a symbol of everything we'd fought for. Honesty, loyalty, and the unbreakable bond between mothers and daughters. Later that afternoon, we sat together in the living room, the necklace resting safely in its box on the coffee table. I told her stories about the women who'd worn it before us, their struggles, their victories, the way each of them had left their mark on our family's history. She listened with rapt attention, her eyes shining with pride and wonder. I never realized, she murmured, how many battles they fought, how much they sacrificed to make sure we had a future. I smiled softly, my heart full. That's what a legacy is, I said. It's not just the things we pass down. It's the strength we build in each other, the lessons we carry forward. It's the promise that no matter what happens, we stand together. She nodded, her expression fierce. No one will ever take that from us again. No, I agreed, my voice steady. They won't. The day faded into evening, the light turning soft and golden. We sat there, the quiet between us filled with the knowledge that we had weathered the storm and come out stronger on the other side. The legacy was secure now, not just in a piece of jewelry, but in the bond we'd reforged. Margaret's lies and manipulations had tested us, but they hadn't broken us. They'd taught us. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of pink and orange, I reached for the necklace box and held it to my chest. I thought of my mother, of her mother, of all the women who'd carried this burden and this blessing. And I knew, without a doubt, that we would carry it forward. So that's how I reclaimed the legacy that Margaret tried to steal, and how my daughter and I found our way back to each other. It wasn't just about a necklace, it was about standing up for the truth, about drawing a line in the sand, and about showing my daughter that some things are worth fighting for. If this story resonates with you, or if you've ever felt like someone tried to rewrite your history, know this. You have the strength to stand tall. And if you enjoyed this journey of resilience and rediscovery, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. We've got even more stories like this. Stories of courage, of family, of finding your voice when it matters most. Click the videos on your screen to continue the journey with us. And remember, legacies aren't just inherited, they're forged, one choice at a time. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.